The two Jills, a psychologist and psychic intuitive, reveal mind-blowing insights that turn psychology, self-help, and conscious teachings on their heads. Why? Because they work. Real help, sincere growth is here. Welcome to Psyched.
Hey, Jill.
Hi, Jill. How are you?
I am awesome. Today is the most beautiful day ever. Fall is my season.
I love fall too. And I showed you a little picture of we have neighborhood swans, a pair, and they showed up in my pond today. And I'm like, whenever they show up, I literally feel like a Disney princess. I'll be staring. I apologize. If I'm looking over here, I'm looking at those freaking gorgeous swans.
Yeah, I think your house is like jungle habitat over there. All right, so let's see. Today, we had decided that we were going to talk about trust today. And as I was sitting down this morning, having my coffee and pontificating, the day, this idea of anticipation really started to come to me. And I was thinking, maybe we can change out the topic and move to anticipation because it was coming on kind of so hard. But as I sat there and drank my coffee, it seemed like trust and anticipation are so entwined that I think they're perfect together. So that's what we're going to look at today, the interrelationship between trust and anticipation, and really how trust can stand on its own, and maybe we can extricate it, or separate it from anticipation and see that we really may not need that extra step. At least that's how I'm kind of perceiving it. So as we talk about it, we'll see what comes up.
I love it. I have to say, I love our recording days because you have 2 hours on me time zone wise. And I think you do get up earlier than I do sometimes. So I wake up and I look at my text messages and there's these very wise, pithy kinds of what about this? What do you think about this? Should we do this today? And I just love it.
Well, I know you'll be patient with it. Other people are like, formulate a thought and get it out all at once. And that's actually not the way I work. I kind of keep expounding, and it's like I'm a snowball that just keeps going. And then at the end of the trail, I'm like, oh, it's done. This is nice. It all comes together, but it doesn't come as a whole. It comes in pieces. All right. So where to begin? Why don't you begin, Jill? Because I feel like trust was the beginning of all of that. So why don't we start there and then see where it goes?
Okay. Trust for me when it's allowed, when you're allowing it in your life, it can feel like a really nice bedrock or an anchor for who and what you are and your sense of others and who and what they are. While accounting for the natural riskiness and dangers of life and living in this world, having some degree of essence of, I'll do what I can, and I just, I'll respond accordingly to the other kind of things that can happen in this reality. That's not as satisfying to my brain, but it is a form of trust. And here's the big why, Jill, because I think a lot of people, they may not feel like it's a big deal whether they trust a sense of a supreme being, God, etc. They don't think it matters if they trust the soulful journey of their children or their partner or themselves. But what I observe in my client work is that when somebody lacks trust, either in themselves or another or their children or their journeys or God or this reality, it's almost like a beach ball energetically between them and the other person. Because there is a sense of them energetically and it doesn't make sense. It's almost like, I hurt you too bad. If it's like a parent that divorced, right? The other parent, there's guilt, there's shame, there's lack of trust in their child's ability to be resilient, to overcome that experience, right? So the breakthroughs that happen when I point this out to clients, whatever their version of that is do you trust your child in their soulful journey, right? This isn't, there are no guarantees with this, right? It's almost like a part of them just kind of like, wow, I've never even thought about it that way. I've never even thought about it that way, that I have a choice in how I trust myself, a sense of God, others, etc.
I like that. The way you're describing it is kind of the way I look at it. I look at trust because you're saying the self, others, God, right? There's this wholeness to it that you're kind of describing. And I think we do a disservice if we try to break it down. Well, how do you trust yourself? And then how do you trust another? And then how do you trust God? To me, trust is, like fear and love, whole, right? And it comes only from a place of wholeness. So if you start breaking it apart, in my opinion, you've lost the essence of what it is. All right. So trust isn't conditional. Trust is a state of being and a state of mind at the same time. It is not something that you earn. And honestly, you can't lose it. So when you start with these different parameters of trust, then you could look at the other areas of your life where you're invoking trust or withdrawing trust and kind of ask yourself, wait a minute, what is this actually? If this isn't trust coming from my wholeness and all of that, then what is this? Because we lose trust here as a buoyant concept because of our misdiagnosis and misunderstanding of what it is.
I love how you said that. And one example of that I see, Jill, is individuals, and this kind of goes back to the brain and the stories that people tell themselves. I've heard from so many different people in my personal life and in my work, oh, I'm this way, or I have a hard time trusting because of. And for those that are parents or children of divorce, right, it's because my parents got divorced when I was 5, 8, 15, whatever that is, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's their storyline. And what they don't realize is that somebody can say the exact same thing based on some other factor. My grandpa that I was really close to passed away when I was 18. I mean, you know what I mean? So there's always some rationalization of lack of trust. And we don't need to rationalize it. I don't feel like that serves us because it doesn't get us to what I love is the transcendence where we can create a version of ourselves that is more trusting. Because you're right, it's not trust ideally is not person dependent. It's not situational dependent. It's not outcome based, right? So I can just imagine the people going, well, I've been cheated on 3 times, or you don't understand. I've been married for 20 years and I just found out they're cheating on me. I get it. And I mean, big hugs and sympathy. That's messed up. And I'm sorry that's happening to you. But here's the thing. Trust, another way to look at it is you trust yourself to get through any nonsense that can happen in this reality. And that sets you up for success and possibly making even more aware choices, right? I'm not blaming the victim here. If somebody's like, you should have seen that he was capable of this when you got together, when you said I do 20 years ago. I'm not saying that. Some individuals just have non-characteristic behavior at times, at different times in life, chemical imbalances, hormonal changes. A lot of people can change their stripes based on whatever. But are you going to allow yourself and make the effort to make yourself okay as possible in these super unfortunate situations that do and will happen in this life?
Yes. And so that's a really good example of not moving that into now the trust is broken and the relationship can't be repaired. That's not what just happened, right? Somebody else can't break your trust. The fallacy is that you believe you need to place your trust in that person and create that vulnerability. That's not required in a relationship, right? The thing about relationships is they're always changing, and you want them to be. They're not static. They're not solid. They're evolving always. right? But if you set it in stone and say, I trust that everything is going to remain exactly the same, that is super precarious, right? That's not going to work. And then when that house of cards falls over, we call it betrayed trust. It's really, this is where we go into anticipation a little bit. This is where you had this, or even an ideal, you had this idea, and now that idea doesn't hold water anymore. What's required of us in that moment is to stay out of blame and all those other things that you and I have been talking about up until this point, and stay out of creating a new narrative here, right? And it is a seductive narrative, right, of blaming that other person, because clearly if they cheated, they did something happened, right? We're not going to deny it, but this is where the brain conjures all of these ideas, right? Blame and rationalization and loss and victimhood, and a million narratives are spun out of that. And to your point, they can be rationalized, right? And that's what we're trying to do, is say, everybody does that. Maybe you don't have to do that, right? So going back, when somebody steps out, if the idea was that you decided in your relationship that you were not going to step out of the relationship, right, with someone else, right? Then when somebody does something, that's a, what would you call it? That's like a point of, okay, we're here now. What do we do? It's a new decision point, because the game has changed, right? And you can't put the genie back in the bottle, but you're not supposed to be able to do that. That's not the point, right? So I just see this as, it is your opportunity to decide at that point what you want to do. You can, and look, there's a lot to it. I'll leave it at that for now, but trust is not what happened, right? Betrayal of trust is not what happened there.
Or at least it's not the only thing that happened, right? Is that what you're
saying? I'm saying it just blew up the narrative. It just blew up your expectations. It blew up your anticipation. It blew up what you believed your life was going to look like moving forward. It blew up a lot of fixed ideas. That's what happened.
Yeah. There's a situation, and I'm just going to try to neutralize this as much as possible since they may listen to this podcast. I have heard of instances of somebody that younger adult consistently is dating someone that doesn't trust them, constantly looking through their phone, constantly, like, let me see if you are where you said you were. Actually, literally, this has happened with multiple young adults that I'm aware of and close to. And there's a part of me like, why are you putting up with that? Right? I can't even imagine a situation where my husband would be like, okay, hand over your phone. You potentially naughty girl. Let me see if you're having inappropriate conversations with anyone, or spying on me, or looking at my email to see if, anything inappropriate is going on. I can't even imagine that. So my first head goes to the person that I'm close to. Why are you putting up with that? And why is she doing that? Or why is he doing that? Right. But I realize there's two parties to that. Right. So there's so many choices when you really slow down the brain and its ability to just launch into evaluation, assessment, yes, judgment. I'm a fan of judgment. Judgment is the line in the sand that you are not okay with and that you're okay with for yourself and an opinion about others. And that doesn't have to be tragic in my mind. But that immediately means like, lose her, lose him, whatever. It's more complicated than that, right? It is more complicated than that. And everybody, has their own choices that they're going to make in that regard. But I do love the idea that if people could realize that their sense of well-being in a relationship or in their relationship with themselves is not based on some of the things that the brain thinks it is, right? This room to breathe, room to make mistakes. We all make mistakes. We just make different mistakes, right? So having this conception that a relationship or a partnership is, I had the visual when you were talking about it of, you know, people grow, people change, relationships grow and change. They're supposed to change. That's how they last if they change.
Yeah.
And that doesn't have to mean it's all positive, and it doesn't have to mean it's all negative either. I've had the envisioning of a straitjacket. You can't live in a straitjacket. You can't put yourself in one and function well, and you can't put another person in that, and you can't put a relationship dynamic in that either.
I love that.
It won't work.
It can't work.
Mm-mm.
It can't work. And to me, that's why things blow up, right? You know, if you squeeze a balloon hard enough, you're eventually, you know, things are just going to keep popping out all over the place. Like the more you try and keep things the same, the more things erupt.
Yeah.
Right. And, you know, I like the example that you give, because in my mind, like begets like. Right. So if someone is looking at your texts, or if they're jealous of you or whatever, we know it's not a far cry that the reason that they're jealous of you is because of their own thoughts. Either they're stepping out, or they know they would step out. Right. And I do believe that there is a projection often going on, because we think other people think the way we do. We just do. Right. So I know you don't love the word projection, but it's this idea that I can't trust her because I don't even trust myself.
Exactly.
Right.
No, I agree with you on this. Yeah.
These are the weird aspects of trust that I don't really love. Right. So when I look at, that's not trust, right? To me, is not stepping out of a relationship has nothing to do, in my mind, with trust. There are endemic internal problems, and those get transferred to the relationship, and you start to blame someone else for what you're doing, basically. I mean, it's very gaslighty and all that. But I think for me, and I do this with the kids too, like I had parents who always used to come to me and they say, my kid, we had an understanding. They weren't supposed to drink, or they were supposed to come home on time, and they didn't do whatever it was that the contract was, and now the trust is broken. All right, I hear that all the time. Now I don't trust my kid. And then they make excuses now for why they track them, why they, start limiting that, which is the same example as you're saying, between two people who are dating. It's the same thing happens between, you just get more and more restrictive. Things go in a very bad direction when you keep these ideas of mistrust alive. There's no pulling back out of that. I'm sorry. The only thing you can do is shift your mindset, understand that that is not trust, and there's no basis for the loss of trust. And I always tell people, and I think you already mentioned this similarly, is I don't trust my kid to not drink or to not take drugs or to do what I told him to do or follow my rules. I trust my kid to handle whatever load of shit they step in, right? That's trust. That's empowering. All these other things are hugely disempowering and demeaning and spiral further and further from what you are trying to recapture. This false sense of trust, right? Follow my rules and we're good. That's not trust, people. It's not even close.
I love this. And I'm so glad you talked about parenting. And I teed up in our little shared note about future topics, a whole bunch of parenting ones. So for those that are looking forward to those, we are ready to go. So trust related to our children. Oh my gosh, this is such a big one. And I definitely fit the model you're teeing up here in terms of, I know what I was like as a teenager. I know what what my parents were not aware of that I was getting away with, right? I benefited from the lack of technology at that time, and the kids that are kind of skirting around these technology maneuvers that their parents have put in place. there is a part of my Jill that's impressed by it, because the level of intelligence and maneuvering and strategy involved in, okay, I've got this app on my phone and I want to do this. And if I don't get around this app that's tracking me, then what are my options? I mean, there's a lot of higher cognitive reasoning going on there. So there is a part of me going, this is impressive. I mean, this could come in handy in life, hopefully for good things, not for bad things. But the trusting our kids is, I had to blow it up really in a big idea way. Can I imagine that my kids have a wider range of themselves, what I call a soulfulness, that has an intent and a design and an enjoyment in who and what my child is? Do they want that life to continue, right? I know that sounds very like, how is this useful? For me, it was game changing, because I could overthink every freaking detail about what could go wrong that could maim them, harm them, hurt them, or kill them, right? I'm really, really good at the whole decision possibility tree, scenario analysis, and the probabilities, and okay, who's she with? Oh yeah, they are a bad driver. Georgia, can you drive, please? You know what I mean? I'm really weighing all of it, and probably a pretty impressive way too, that part of my Jill is impressed with. But it gets me nowhere, right? Because there's so many variables that I had to be humble about, I have no control over.
Yep.
Even if I do trust Georgia as a driver, right? I have no control over every other person on the road that she's with. I have no control over how distracted she could be in the car, right? I have rules, right? I give her rationality for why we do things a certain way, why I do things a certain way, why her dad does things a certain way, literally praying and hoping she's listening. But there is so much bigger picture trust I have that helps me anticipate her coming home every night, me getting to give her a hug. And I work with parents that have lost children, right? I have a sense that if I ever did, God forbid, lose a child, I would figure it out. I would figure out a way to carry on. I would figure out a way to create meaning and purpose in my life. And you bet your ass, I would be doing all of my woo-woo transcendental powers to feel connected with my child and spirit, just like I help other parents do. And
that is a perfect example of what trust is.
Okay.
Right? Shit happens here. So I trust myself to deal with whatever comes up. And it is a trickle down situation. If you are not trusting yourself and taking stock of your life up until this point and realize how much you have navigated, right? And rather than, I did the same thing. I was kind of parenting from this. I was a hot mess growing up, right? So I knew every possible whatever. And I was like a hawk on my kids for that reason, right? Because I was like, how am I alive today? Right? It was really that kind of like, how am I not dead? Driving drunk, all the shit I did, right? Crazy town. So it did instill in me a lot of fear. But when I said, you know what, I did all that shit and I'm here to talk about it, not so that I can be hypocritical and tell somebody else, don't do the mistakes I made. Like, that's not really helpful. Everybody's got to feel things out for themselves. And so I actually looked at not how dangerous and risky my life was, but how I did it, how I did get here and how I navigated that. And that does make me feel like, damn, okay, if I can do it, other people can do it. My parents weirdly trusted me to take care of myself. That's actually what happened. My brain didn't interpret it that way. My brain interpreted it like, where were my parents? Like, who was taking care of this chick? But in interpreting it that way, I missed the self-trust piece. My brain bypassed it. So it is a flip of the switch. to honor where you are and honor your past and how you got here, especially if it's shitty. You should have more trust in yourself, not less, right? Watch what the brain is doing here and how undermining it can be if we're not interpreting things properly and in a way that serves us, right? And my son, one day, God bless him, he came to me. I don't know what he was doing. It wasn't great. But he came to me and he said, Mom, I just want you to know, regardless of what this shit show looks like right now, I know that I am making decisions and I am okay with the consequences. And the minute I knew that, I was like, okay, I could actually leave him alone. But few kids give their parents that. Because a lot of the kids like to draw the line of when something goes wrong, you should have told me, right? Kind of preying on our, am I a good parent? Insecurities, right? Am I doing enough, right? But when my son told me that, I was like, you go. I'm in your corner. I got your back. You know, do it is what you're going to do. I know you're doing it with two eyes open and I trust you. Live your life. And he freed me. Honestly, he freed me. And that's when I understood in a cemented way what trust was.
What a gift he gave you, right? To have that moment. And I have to say, I do love the idea that there was some soulful, maneuvering there, that your widest self and his widest self, you're like, if you really want me to back off, tell me this.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, there's no doubt. He knows, like,
right?
you and I are very soulfully, you know, at each other.
Yeah.
And so it is something, rather than make all the rules and then have everybody have to adhere to the rules.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to me, rules were made to be broken. That's my philosophy. And it has been my entire life. So rules don't work well with me. And they honestly didn't work with my two girls. Were like, fine, I don't care. But, you know, they could toe the line, but my son, no, he's me. He and I are one and the same. And so rules wasn't possible. Wasn't the way to trust. It never is, by the way, never is.
Even the friendships, there's a lot of, let's put it this way, there's a lot of parents I know, newer parents and more seasoned parents with young adults or kids who have kids situation in that age range. There's a lot of parents who are acting in a way that their child that they are accountable for what their child is or isn't. They're holding themselves responsible for it. They're expecting that society is holding them responsible for it. So there's a lot of overthinking and, oh my God, I need to make sure that you are error-free or are minimizing errors in your life so that we can avoid, you being unhappy or you making mistakes or you making me look bad, right? There's a lot of complex layers to this when it comes to parents trusting their children. Speaking of rules, exactly, right? There are so many parents I know that, well, my kids I know somebody who he and his wife at the time, there are 3 kids. They basically said, you all have to get straight A's. You have to be in advanced placement college level credit classes as soon as they're available. And you have to play at least one sport every season. And they I
Wow.
sense that their presumption was this is a foolproof way, a fail-proof way for our kids to be happy, thriving adults. Interestingly, neither one of the parents went to college. They're both entrepreneurs, and as far as I gather, successful entrepreneurs. They are very health-minded, but I know one of the parents and their kids don't talk to them. They have zero relationship with their child. And I don't know if it's one of the children or more. But I have nothing but compassion for them. That I'm sure that they were trying to do the best thing with what they knew. Oh, this is the way to do this. I've got it all figured out. The hubris.
But we did it the hard way, right? So when we look at our lives, I'm like, God, it's so hard.
Let me finish this for just a second, because you're totally right. Yeah. I think our kind of footloose and fancy free, take every moment as, without these like, this is the structure way is harder. But the hubris and the arrogance, the lack of humility involved in the type of parenting style of my kid's future will be ruined if I let them quit band in 5th grade, or they try soccer and they don't like it, or yes, they love dance, but for some reason, I can't imagine why, they don't like choreographed dance and they don't like the recitals and the performances. I have no idea why, but they've got to learn to suck it up and get good at this so that they can be the adults that I wasn't, or that I need them to be, or that I can be proud of, or grandma can be proud of, or whatever. And to me, all of that is bullshit and filled with lies and self-deception. And the amount of anxiety and pressure it puts on our children, to me, is heartbreaking.
It is. And I think this is, another good example of where that anticipatory dread comes in, right? So like you said earlier, we have the ability to anticipate all sorts of shit that can go wrong, right? And now we think being a good parent is anticipating all of the shit that can go wrong and putting rules in or fail safes that are going to prevent all that shit that I made up, by the way, that the brain made up. And now I'm going to institute all of it. So we have to really watch now how anticipation, right, is tied. It seems to be how we can secure trust, right? So look at all the ways things can go poorly, that trust can go poorly, that you can begin to be unhappy, that a child can be unhappy, which is the parent's, greatest fear, right? And then we put rules in place so that somebody's going to do it. The problem with this is you can always anticipate more problems, right? And then you can just make more rules. None of these things go to alleviating any of the problems that you could potentially, right? But you've actually made, in the absence of those problems and the institution of those rules, you've literally made the person unhappy, which is what you tried to avoid in the first place. There's no avoiding it. They're either going to be unhappy when it finally happens, or they're going to be unhappy with the anticipation and the rules that are required to sidestep the inevitable.
That's right.
But you have to watch the brain, because the brain is saying this could possibly happen. It's imagining something. It's forecasting. It's making it up because we've asked it to. We're like, what's the path to happiness? Right? We make up what that is, and we decide, okay, this is where we need to be operating in this very small space. And we've limited ourselves so much, but this anticipation should never happen. Then the rules and the laws would never happen. Don't ask your brain what the future looks like. Don't ask the brain how to have a happy child. Don't ask the brain questions where it's going to make up the answers, and then you're going to solidify that made up thing as true. And then you're going to act on that for 20 years as a parent or in a relationship. You're going to act on that. This is not a good strategy. Anticipating, making things up, acting on what you've made up as if it's true. You've lost your presence. You've lost trust in yourself immediately, right? And you believe what's not true over your ability to just deal with life.
Exactly. And the inherent risks that are in it. To me, I would really encourage people to do this, to take this exercise. Get out a piece of paper, get out your phone, notes, whatever you use to write ideas down. Write down 3 things, 3 rules that you are most concerned about you or your loved ones following, or your employees, whatever it is. Okay, those are the rules. what do you think it's protecting you or them or your company from?
Mm-hmm.
And then the third step is, but is it really?
Yeah.
Think of how many laws as societies we have on the books now. And those laws are broken every single day.
Yeah.
Laws and rules for some people are enough to go, oh, I definitely don't want to have that second drink and drive everyone home. And for other people, it's like, whatever. And this outcomes don't make sense. Outcomes are not always logical. Sometimes it's the people that didn't have the second drink that do get killed by another, for some reason, person not paying attention, driver on the road. And they did everything right. That's my point, right? So the allowance of, oh my God, this is a risky world. Whoa, right? Going back to another point though, this, your sense of presence and feeling very authoritative over self, creating trust of you because of your teenage years, I completely agree with that. I am more concerned that my kids can think for themselves, think on their feet, and think in high stress, screwed up situations than I am about making sure that all the rules are being followed, right? Because when if shit did go down, right, and they were doing something wrong or they were with people that were doing something wrong and something went bad quick, the last thing I want their brain to go to is, oh my God, what is my mom going to say? Oh my God, my dad's going to be so mad at me, right? I would much rather have their brain be dedicated to, okay, now what? Now what do we do in this situation? This happened or that happened, or this person's in that condition or that person's in that condition. If the brain is totally caught up in safety is from following rules, I'm sensing that the ability to function well on your feet in a high stress, high stakes situation is compromised.
100%. I love that because we had a difference. My friends and I had differences of opinions of what we should tell our children about our teenage years. Right. And I'm putting it all out on the table. Like, your mom was a hot mess. If I didn't meet your dad, I'd be dead. I was very open about it because first of all, I don't want them to look at me as some kind of, person who didn't make mistakes, right? I don't want them to have an ideal version of me that's not true, right? That they're trying to live up to. That's bullshit, right? So for me, my failings, I thought that they should know, but I had a lot of friends who said, no. If they know that that's the way I was, then they're going to throw that in my face every time they do something. And I'm like, so what? Right? Like, that's what X are we trying to solve for here? And so look, people do this differently, but I like putting all the information out there on the table and then just letting them know that I just slog through all the crap. And that's how you figure it out. There's no handbook on life or parenting for that matter.
This is such a great example, Jill. Thank you for bringing it up, because I've had the same conversations with my husband about, okay, because I did have I was a wilder kid. I really did just want to have fun. I can't believe I'm still alive either. When I think of all the things, I'm just like, oh my God, literally. And maybe that does help me trust that, like, if we're here, we're here. And if we're not, we're not. And sometimes I'm like, I don't know how much real control we have over that decision and that outcome, but I'm not going to be reckless, right? Knowingly. But anyway, these types of choices about what do you tell your kids about what you were like or what the other parent was like when they were young. It isn't as dramatic or as, oh, that will mean this outcome or that will mean that outcome as we think it is, right? And to me as a parent, those types of do or die kind of situations, I dramatized them all the way along. I will never forget our oldest one. I was trying to pick her preschool. Okay. I'm not in New York City. I'm in Idaho. We've got different choices than you guys do in the city, right? Different choices. So I don't have an early childhood education background. I don't know anything. So I'm like, high street, Wesleyan, Montessori. I mean, like, oh my God, the king size bed in our primary bedroom was just, I had literature and handbooks and brochures all over the place. What was it? The year was 2005 or 2004 or something. And I remember Jeff kind of walking through, I think he'd put the kids to bed, and he said, what's up? And I said, I don't know the right place for V. She went by Olivia then. And he's like, Jill, it's not Harvard versus McDonald's.
Yes.
And I was just like, he talked me off a ledge. And because there was such a kind of moment of reflection, and I'm like, but it feels like it is. And we both kind of had a laugh about it. And then I just made a choice, and it was stuff like that I'm like, it doesn't mean what we think it means. It's not the guarantee we think it is. It's not the avoidance of risk that we think it is. It's if we can there's a lot of amazing adults, like good and godly adults that have been through shit, whose parents did not overthink these things and didn't think about them at all. And there's a lot of adults that are very unhappy, that are miserable, that make everyone around them miserable. And maybe they literally are like full-fledged criminals whose parents did all the right things, quote unquote. There is no formula for that. What was that?
That's the issue, is that the brain is kind of saying the reason you are where you are is for it pulls out 15 factors out of, infinite amount of moments in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, these are the 15 things that are it's a joke, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have to start paying attention to this brain a whole lot more, because it is just towing the party line, number one, right? So it's very caught up in sort of the indoctrination factor. This idea that, 10 habits of successful people. Are you joking? Are you joking?
So dumb. I hate those.
All of that shit. It is so insulting. And truly, it's insulting to life, to the divine, to, everything that's here. Oh my God, it blows my mind. So this oversimplification, the brain has a way of oversimplifying things that aren't simple and overcomplicating things that are. Mm-hmm. It is literally the opposite of the obvious.
Crazy making.
Right? It's crazy making. And so we have to start paying attention to this idea, even when you were on the bed trying to figure out where to take your kid. What was active? Anticipation. Mm-hmm. Where is this going to get them? How is this going to go? I'm writing their future as I sit here on this bed, and I don't like where it's going, and I could actually make a mistake. No, you can't. Trust means you can't make a mistake.
Yeah.
That's what trust is. And it actually also means somebody else can't make one, because you ebb and flow with what other people do.
I do want to offer another theory, because I actually, my approach, my system is that we can make mistakes, and we do make mistakes. There are errors to be made. I totally respect your philosophy, and I love that whenever it works. To me, I know I have made mistakes, and I know these won't be the only ones. And I'm okay calling it a mistake. I really am. And I'm very open. My kids are 20 and 17 now with them. Sometimes when I look back on the choices that I made for literally like where my oldest one went to school, and I can rationalize it. Well, how many people know at their kid being 6 years old that they were Mensa? Literally, she's been in Mensa since she was like 5 or 6 years old. So I can rationalize all the reasons why I should have done this, or I should have done that, or this was different, this is special. I really do, rationalizing the overthinking. But I've told her, I feel like maybe I made a mistake with putting you in the all-day gifted and talented program in the public schools. We tried private schools. She was everywhere for a while. There's actually a cute story about that. This was like with your son, kind of like, Mom, I'm okay. This was V's. I'll tell you this in a second because it's super funny. I said, I think I may have made a mistake. And she said, I think if I were to do it over again, I wouldn't have done all day gifted and talented. We called it GATE in our school district. but I don't blame you, Mom. I know that you were really, trying to make a hard decision, and I totally see why you made it. So I'm not mad at you about it, but I do think maybe I would be a happier, 20-year-old if I did have more variety in the kids that I hung out with, and there wasn't so much emphasis on, you're a smart person, so you need to do this and you need to do that, and you need to spend more time on this and more time on that. And it sucked the fun out of the process. But in second grade, I'm embarrassed to even say this. In second grade, we pulled her out of a very regimented, very structured education program, thinking she needed something that was more able to let her really shine and get grades ahead and things that she was really strong at. And it was such a cultural shift. They didn't have desks. They all had space on the carpet to sit. It was very kind of bohemian in a way. And she went to the teacher on the fourth day because she did school visits. She asked for masking tape to make herself a square. She's in second grade on the floor. And Miss Jess said, I don't know if she's going to like it here. And then she told me what happened. And I was like, uh-oh. So this was fall. By February, I was realizing, and she was like, this was not going well. So we did school visits again in March of her second grade year. And she did school visits. And I was like, well, what did you think? And the one at the public school in the all-day gate class, she said, I loved it. And I'm like, what did you like about it? And she's super visual. And it takes her a minute to put a word to her sensation of it, which is not linear. It's not verbal. It's not, communicated easily. And she said, they had desks. It's just like, oh my God. Right. So I was just like, and it was like my wider self was like, Jill, what she really cares about right now is a freaking desk. So can you just get out of the way? Maybe as long as she has a desk, she's good. Right. So we talked about moving at the end of the school year, and then somebody in the conversation said, well, why not just move her now? Why are you waiting? Right. And then I asked her, do you want to start next week? What do you think? Or do you want to finish at the other, fancy private school for the end of there? She's like, they'll take me next week. She was thrilled.
Yeah.
And again, it wasn't perfect. We look back on it now and I'm like, I don't know if that was the right choice. That teacher, I wouldn't want to hang out with her all day. You know what I mean? Oh God. Anyway.
I had the same thing with my middle daughter. We were all over the place with her as well. But I do think when it comes to the idea of mistakes, it's not that I have any problem with mistakes. It's just the nature of them. We don't have to worry about making them, right? Yes. Everybody's so afraid of making a mistake, and it's just like, you really don't need to be. You trust yourself, you trust the other person, so it's not that I'm against mistakes and I don't believe you're making a mistake. It's just the point of be free to make a mistake.
Yes.
Right? Rather than think that making a mistake is the worst thing that you can do and then trying to anticipate everything so you don't end up making that mistake. And the problem is the reason why you anticipate not making a mistake and try to dance around it is because you don't trust, right? Mm-hmm. The anticipation is there in a way showing you don't trust yourself, not to make the right decision, but to deal with life.
Yeah. Because we will let people down. We will let ourselves down. And what a resilient making system you'd have as a parent. And I know I kind of unwittingly came across being a parent is when I did let them down, it gave them room to create a response of, I'm okay. You know what I mean? She's late to get me, or she's mad at me because I did this or I did that. She's telling me I need to walk home from school or take the bus, as if that was literally tragic. Anyway, so there were definitely ways that I was late or I let them down or whatever. Of course I had those moments. And my strategy to mistake making and error making is being ready to say you're sorry when you've made one. Mm-hmm. And that isn't the end of the world either. That's humility. That's grace. that self-forgiveness, that self-love of I screwed up. This morning, I told Jeff I volunteered to do something and I didn't have time to do it. And I was, a little crazy making, trying to get done what I said I would do. And I'm like, why did I even do that? I mean, anyway. So I was the first one to say, sorry, babe, here you go.
Yeah.
I did it.
And I think as I listened to you, one of the important things for me was my narrative, right, was standing in the way of, either being afraid of making the wrong decision. I was also just very caught up in, how do I do this the right way? As if there is a right way, right? And I was so caught up in a narrative that my parents didn't do it right, that I was, kind of overcompensating for a past that honestly I just misinterpreted. And so that narrative that you're bringing in, whatever your parenting, your parental history of your family of origin, you got to look at that carefully. You have to look at the narrative that you're bringing forward about the type of parent you want to be and why. And then try to throw all that out the window and just live your life, basically. Yes. Right. So, people, I do encourage, based on some of the stuff that we've talked about before, about what narratives are you bringing forward? What are the ones that are undermining to your sense of self, or other people developing a sense of self, and in that, a sense of trust in self? So just, there are a lot of precursor conversations that we've had that kind of underscore some of these components that we're talking about today, that we're maybe glossing over a little bit, but the historical narratives are super important, because we're either overcompensating for them when we don't need to be, or we're succumbing to them as victims of them when we don't need to be.
Exactly.
And we want to take that off the table, because that's just going to, screw things up moving forward for everybody who goes forward.
I think in some ways we have to have some sort of a self-narrative. My only point is, make it a good one. And what I mean by a good one is that helps you be your most freaking amazing you, right? The fact that my parents never called the parent of where I was staying when I was 15, 16, 17 years old is beyond me. I'm like, how could they not call Lisa's mom and say, hey, Cindy, are you going to be there? She was never there. She was always at her boyfriend's house, which is why we stayed at Lisa's, because we felt like we could play adult as much as possible, as if we could make our own choices and come home when we wanted to go home. The fact that my parents didn't know that, at the time I was like, this is awesome, right?
Yes.
And there's now, my narrative is, maybe for all these different reasons, as their third child, right? One of my sisters was a lot. And, I think wore my parents out. My parents had 3 kids. My mom was 23 by the time she had me, 3 kids by 23. I didn't even start having kids till I was 32. There's a whole different maturity level and, life experience and what you're focused on, right? I think by the time I was that age, my mom decided she wanted some extra money. So she worked outside the home. She was doing well. I think they were just busy with other stuff. But my narrative wasn't neglect. My narrative was, maybe they just weren't as worried about me. Maybe I'm somehow, it's not lack of love, because I knew that wasn't true. So mine was like, I somehow picked a situation, or maybe soulfully designed a situation where they left me alone in these ways. And that was a bonus, that when I got home, I could watch TV, I could eat Cheetos, I could do whatever I wanted. I had so much authority, Jill, and I loved it.
Yeah, it's so weird, because I had this sense of, look, I was lying to my parents all the time, right? And so when my kids got to be a certain age, I just assumed they were lying to me all the time, because I lied to my parents all the time, right? So I had these, these kind of assumptions. And I would always say, you can't bullshit a bullshitter. And it was just a very interesting, in a weird way, my parents probably trusted me. They shouldn't have, because I was lying all the time, right? So it created just a very murky, self-trust was not something that developed out of whatever the pieces of my life were. Because I knew I was lying. They didn't know I was lying. So in a weird way, they were probably just trusting me to just live my life. But because I was lying, I just never got to the point of trusting myself. Do you get what I'm saying? So there was this weird, I bypassed it somehow. And so that's how the narrative sort of tanked. And in my mind is that I'm not trustworthy, you know, and I shouldn't be trusted. And that evolved into I don't trust myself, which is really interesting. And so it was a long road back, you know, but it was cemented the moment, you know, my son said, I'm good with the decisions that I make. Like that was like the fact that, you know, you've arrived to a certain extent, because if I hadn't, him saying that wouldn't have changed anything, right? It wouldn't have been that transcendent moment that it was. I would have dismissed what he was saying as nice try. You know, it would have been just words.
It's perfect. I'm still loving that Decker gave you that gift on whatever levels that happened on. I guess, and I know we're kind of starting to wrap up here. For any of us, you know, in many of the roles that we play, there's a part of us that can look for a guarantee. There's a part of us that can look for a foolproof or fail-proof plan. And I think it's so valuable for us to really notice that temptation in ourselves of looking for an authority figure or looking for a set of external rules and experts that if I just follow what they did or what they're doing, then I'm going to be okay. Then my child's going to be okay. Or then my company is going to be okay. Then my future is going to be okay. All of these things. You are in so many ways disregarding the natural risk, the natural variability, and the inherent lack of guarantees of anything, positive or negative, that we have in this reality. And that's self-deception. At some point or another, you will find yourself in a place of, oh, fudge, I didn't think this could happen. I thought I did everything right. I thought if I did all these things, then it would lead to this. And this isn't fair, right?
Right.
So you can unplug yourself from that whole self-deception and just recognize every situation is different. You are not your parents. You are not your children. Your children are not their parents. They are not going to be their children, right? We are all a dynamic, ever-flowing, evolving human. And I love that. I think that's great. So a better strategy that I've seen work, and I know has worked better with my kids, is there's going to be mistakes. There's going to be uh-ohs. There's going to be oh fudge moments. I want you to be present in yourself when that happens so that you can create the version of you that you like best, and you can support others in being their best, whatever shit is going down.
Yeah. Look, I think it's really important. I don't know that, you know, I'd be curious to see, you know, to hear how people hear, you know, this conversation.
Yeah.
And I would love some feedback for who's ever, you know, kind of willing to give it. It is a very, you know, counterculture thing to really say, don't put your trust in another, right? Do not, reserve that for you. Reserve your trust for you. We can't trust that politicians are going to take care of us. We can't trust that laws are going to take care of us. This is what you're saying. Children cannot trust that parents are going to take care of them. This is not the way this world operates. Trust is whole and it is inherent and it comes from the inside out. You can't earn it, but you also, the benefit of that is you can't lose it, right? So don't make the mistake of having relationships be boiled down to this false understanding of trust. That's not trust. That, you know, those are demands. Those are basically demands. And people should bristle against those. I actually believe that, because they undermine a relationship. They just do. And they're undermining for both parties, you know, for the, whether you're the strayer or the one that's been strayed, you know, it's, yeah. And the beauty is, in my mind, and people don't look at it this way, the beauty is when something happens in a relationship and you're calling it trust, and now hopefully people are understanding not to do that, but understanding that the genie never goes back in the bottle is the most beautiful beginning of an actual relationship that's not based on this weird loyalty. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is, but codependency at best. You know, that's restricting another's behavior because neither of you would trust yourself to be able to function if those behaviors happened, right? Or if life happened. If people can see that that is where the relationship actually begins, not ends, there's a game changer for you. Yeah.
Trusting you. There was a lot right there that you said, Jill, and there's a lot that I love about it. And the trusting themselves to me is the biggest part, that no matter how your parents let you down, no matter how the world let you down, no matter how whatever didn't go the way you wanted it to, that you're here. Somehow you made it through that. You're probably way stronger than you ever imagined you could be. There was probably a version of you back there in your past that was like, I have to have this go the way I needed to or wanted to, or, you know, I'll never make it. You did make it. You've made it through more than you can ever. You are more trustworthy and probably amazingly badass than you can ever imagine. You've also mentioned before, and I'll put it here, the sin of comparison to other people and other parents or other, you know, children of how they were parented. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If your brain has a wheel that does that, you've just got to learn to shush it. You've got to create a you that can go, yeah, brain, I get it. Here you go again. You're getting me nowhere with this line of with this spin here. So I'll just, you know, let you spin over here while I don't pay any attention to you. You have more than your brain that you're operating from. And that ability to trust yourself and give yourself more credit. Rewrite your narrative if you have to about who you are, how you got yourself through something.
Yes.
You got yourself through more than anybody else got you through, right? I want my kids at every age to feel that, because even the best parents, and I know that my husband and I are really great parents in so many ways, if I am comparing, right? You can't, even the best parents, you can't be with your kids 24/7. I'm sorry if that's news to you, right? But because you can't be there all the time, you don't have a choice but to trust them. Trust them, not their teachers, right? My kids had some shitty teachers. They had some great teachers. And anyway, they're alive to tell the story. They're amazing humans.
Yeah. I had a parent once who was, so the dad was watching the daughter. The mom was out. But the mom said to the dad, make sure you watch the daughter. She's your responsibility. So then the daughter's coming to my house. And the dad's like, are you going to be home? I'm like, I don't know where I'm going to be. And these were kids in high school. You know, I'm like, I don't know where I'm going to be. And he's like, well, you know, my wife wants to make sure that you're going to be home to watch my daughter. I'm like, I'm not responsible for your daughter, dude. Right? Like, that's a you problem. I trust my daughter. If you don't trust your daughter, that's your problem. And he was like dumbfounded that I wasn't taking responsibility off his hands for his daughter. I mean, it was crazy, but we got into it, you know. I'm like, that sounds like a you problem. If you don't want her to come over, if you need to come pick her up, whatever you need to do, but you're not passing off some hot potato that I now get to watch. That's not the way my family works. That's the way your family works.
And look at the dynamics, right?
You couldn't even believe it.
Apparently it was the wife that had the real problem, but it was the dad that was calling most likely, so that if anything did go wrong, he is, I know, I called just like you told me to. She said she was going to be there. It's a total
Who can
passing
I
the buck.
blame when something goes wrong? It's hilarious. And I had another situation on a different spectrum, and what you were talking about before. I was working on I do a crisis text line. I had been doing a crisis text line. And there was a girl who I was speaking to, just texting. And she said, nobody can help me. There's nobody here. I don't have a support network. I don't have a mother. She just was going on and on, texting. And I, basically was saying, you forgot someone. You forgot you have you. She was not taking herself into account at all. And it was one of those moments, you could say that to someone and they could be like, I'm useless or whatever. For her, she was like record scratch. She was like, I have never thought about that. Never thought about the fact that I had myself. And that's the mistake we make when we start saying, who can I trust? Who can I trust? Who can I trust? Huge issue, because she never looked at herself. And it's almost like, it's not that she didn't trust herself, it's that she didn't know she could. Otherwise, the record wouldn't have scratched. So interesting how we eliminate ourselves, we annihilate ourselves, whatever it is we're doing, we got to stop doing that. And it is, in a weird way, I think a lot of people are in that boat where it's not that they don't trust themselves, it's just that they never looked at themselves as someone to trust. Mm-hmm. Trust is very outward here.
Exactly. And I really do. I'm discouraging people from oversimplifying this. Oh, they're talking about helicopter parenting. I don't do that. No. That might be a sliver. There might be one little sprinkle on the sundae of what we're talking about. We're talking way deeper than that. Deeper than that, right? The borderline between neglect and doing too much for our kids is one metric, but also, do you believe in your kid, right? I've got one that doesn't clean her room, and I have a sister like that too. She's just messy, right? That isn't a deal breaker for her being a successful adult. Hopefully she's got a maid though. I'm hoping she's make money where somebody's going to pick up after her, or she'll create that version of herself. I'm not worried about it, right? Because she is so much more than that, right? So yeah, I have to say my favorite people that like my inner circle, the people that I love to make time for, are people that trust themselves. There is a part of me that kind of like when I'm like with somebody or I meet somebody and you can tell they don't trust themselves, there is a part of me that goes, well, if you don't trust you, I'm not going to trust you either. Because again, that part of what happens if shit does go down, they're the last ones that I would ever expect. And I think I'm right about this, that are going to go, okay, I have a plan. Let's do this. They can't think. They're frozen.
Yes.
Right. So when my kids have been in hairy, scary situations, I'm like, I'm just calmly listening because they're here to tell me the story. Right. And I'm like, okay, tell me everything. Right. And I'm normally watching for how were they them in that moment? What were they thinking? What were they aware of? What choices were they considering? And what choices did they make? And normally I am like, wow, impressed with it. Can it be cringy at times? My sixth grader literally having a conversation with her band teacher about how no, she really is quitting band. And yes, she does realize there's a performance next week and she doesn't care, right? Is it cringy on some level of my Jill? Oh yeah, totally. And her dad was not happy about it. My husband was not happy about it. She's got to finish things. And I'm like, but what a little badass. I mean, think of how little she was next to the senior and almost retired band teacher trying to bully her into, I'm really disappointed in you, Georgia. And she's like, I'm okay with that.
It's so interesting because I remember telling my kid also, like he was having trouble in whatever class, this was Decker too, my son, and he was rebelling against something. And a lot of the storyline, is like respect your elders, whatever, I don't care. And I said, never lose your rebel. Never. I don't know when and where you're going to need it. And right now, maybe you're a rebel without a cause. One day you will be a rebel with a cause, but never lose your rebel. And so I think, when you're saying, if a kid comes to you with the way they handled a problem, given the resources that they had, you want to be reinforcing, not correcting in those moments. You look for what is right about how they comported themselves or trusted themselves, because that was them in that moment coming online, right? And they're excited when they trust themselves enough and they come online and they do whatever it is they do. These situations are not perfect. Coming online does not, make a great outcome happen. That's not what coming online is, right? So make sure when someone's coming to you and they were online and they're excited about the way that they handled something, that you look for what's right, whether it's their strength or their presence or their rebel, whatever it is, make sure you're looking for the right thing and you're not stuck on, this is a teaching moment. Probably not. And never go into, well, next time, that again, that's the time travel, that's whatever. The less you say, the more their shifts will be cemented.
I admit that there are many times where I'm like, I wonder if next time you might want to do this. It's after the full kind of listening and observing, and they'd have listened to that. So I think I'm okay with the next time part. If there is something valuable that you would have done differently, because maybe there is a better way that I would have done it than they would have done it. And I don't want to, that doesn't feel right to deny that's true either, if that's true, when that happens.
Well, you can tell by the reaction that you get.
Yes.
Whether you are going in the right direction with what you're sharing or going in the wrong direction.
Yes.
Right? And it's not about propping up, this isn't like giving a trophy because you won last prize. That's not what I'm talking about, in this. These are situations that are difficult to navigate and your kid got out of it okay. And, had a moment of reckoning. There's a lot of awareness here and nuance that we're talking about. Not a blow smoke situation by any means. This is you being present and them being present and having a real conversation.
Yes.
And in those cases, I find that both of us are uplifted.
Yep.
It's not didactic. It's me telling you. It's that you learn something from your kid and your kid can then learn something from you, right? Those are the moments you're looking for here when both of you shift.
Yes. Perfect. And I know we did focus a lot on parenting in this example of anticipation and trust, but to me, it fits just as well with employees, with bosses, with businesses, with other relationships and dynamics. This is not just for parents and their children. So there's a lot of applications of this. I love the examples that we gave, Jill. And maybe this is one where we really encourage, because I think both of us are sensing there could be a lot of like loose threads for some people. You and I had said that we're actually excited about some sort of a live stream dynamic, or maybe it's chatted in calls or chatted in like, what about this? What about that? I have this situation. What do you guys think there? We're both in the therapy, wellness, we have answers and advice for you, advisor kind of roles. And I love to use that gift and apply that gift in situations. So I would really encourage people to go to psyched.wtf. Yes, you heard that correctly. It's not psyched.other dots. It's .wtf. And look for this episode. You can just do a search probably for trust and anticipation. Jill Lankler is the wizard at coming up with these super fun, playful names, and I'm sure this will be section.
I don't have one yet. I haven't come up with it yet.
If you just search anticipation and trust, I'm guessing this episode will come up. and then ask your questions, give your feedback. I'm overly sensitive, and I admit that. So I don't normally get a lot of joy over somebody that's going to, be critical or something like that. So I may not read all the comments just because I don't find it useful if somebody just wants to be mad at me that they think I did something wrong. You might be wrong that I did something wrong, or you might be right, and I don't know you, so you're
right. All right, we're not going to psychoanalyze you on this one.
And I'm not going to pretend that all feedback is good feedback. We're not asking for that kind of feedback. But if we can help you, and if you'd like some insight and help, then give it a shot.
I like it. I like it. Yes, we're happy to hear. We're happy to hear from people, and we're obviously happy to hear nice things from people, or nice questions, or good, things that can be helpful to other people. That's
productive
really
conversation. Things that you say out loud to a person, to our faces. Not this like, oh, I'm online so I can be an absolute troll. We're not going to make time or space or even the option for that to happen. So sorry, trolls.
No trolls. All right. I think that's good, right? I think
good stuff.
We talked about a lot of things here. There's just always, I think that the beauty of the conversations that we have is really like, take any part of this and let yourself go with it. Right? There's not anything specific that we're trying to get across. We're just trying to massage the field and just be curious about where you go with any one of the comments, that you and I have sort of teed up today. So
if there were extra kind of buttons that were pushed, if there was extra defensive, like you getting angry or mad or sad or feeling like totally devastated, give yourself a hug. I mean, that there was probably some heavy, I'm going to use another metaphor here, weeding of the garden, that we were offering you these weeds so that you can, cultivate and really make more space and more energy for you to create an experiment, do a trial and error with a version of you that you like better. We can't go back to the past. We can't time travel. But you can be the parent that you always wanted to be. You can be the employee you always wanted to be. You could be the partner you always wanted to be, the adult child you always wanted to be. Every day you have that chance, as long as that other person's alive.
I like it.
All right. Love you, Jill. Great job. Love you.